Into the Woods is a musical with music and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim and book by James Lapine. It debuted in San Diego at the Old Globe Theatre in 1986, and premiered on Broadway on November 5, 1987. Bernadette Peters' performance as the Witch and Joanna Gleason's portrayal of the baker's wife brought acclaim to the production during its original Broadway run. Into the Woods won several Tony Awards, including Best Score, Best Book, and Best Actress in a Musical, in a year dominated by The Phantom of the Opera. The musical has been produced many times, with a 1988 U.S. national tour, a 1990 West End production, a 1991 television production, a 1997 10th anniversary concert, a 2002 Broadway revival, a 2010 London revival, and in 2012 as part of New York City's outdoor Shakespeare in the Park series. The musical intertwines the plots of several Brothers Grimm fairy tales and follows them to explore the consequences of the characters' wishes and quests. The main characters are taken from Little Red Riding Hood, Jack and the Beanstalk, Rapunzel, and Cinderella, as well as several others. The musical is tied together by an original story involving a childless baker and his wife and their quest to begin a family, their interaction with a witch who has placed a curse on them, and their interaction with other storybook characters during their journey. Plot: Act I. With the words Once Upon a Time, the narrator introduces four characters who each has a wish. Cinderella wishes to attend the King's Festival. Jack, a simple young man who wishes that his cow Milky White would give milk. And the baker and his wife, who wish they could have a child. While Little Red Riding Hood buys bread from the baker to take to her grandmother's house, Jack's weary mother nags him into selling the cow, and Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters Florinda and Lucinda tease her about wanting to attend the King's Festival. The baker's neighbor, an ugly old witch, reveals the source of the couple's infertility as a curse she placed on the baker's line after catching the baker's father in her garden stealing magic beans. In addition to the curse, the witch took the baker's father's newborn child Rapunzel. She explains the curse will be lifted if the baker and his wife can find the four ingredients that the witch needs for a certain potion: the cow as white as milk, the cape as red as blood, the hair as yellow as corn, and the slipper as pure as gold, all before the chime of midnight in 3 days' time. All begin their journeys into the woods. Jack goes to the market to sell his beloved pet Milky White. Cinderella's family goes to the festival while Cinderella goes to her mother's grave to ask for guidance, Little Red to her grandmother's house, and the baker, refusing his wife's help, to find the ingredients. Cinderella visits her mother's grave and receives a beautiful gown and golden slippers from her mother's spirit. Jack encounters a mysterious man who mocks him for trying to sell his cow for more than a sack of beans, and then vanishes. Little Red Riding Hood meets a hungry wolf who convinces her to take a detour on her way to Granny's, already having consumed the old woman. The baker sees Little Red in the woods, and when the witch appears, screaming at him to get the red cape, she frightens him so much he forgets the ingredients he needs. Luckily his wife, who followed him into the forest, reminds him. They are squabbling over her presence when they come across Jack with Milky White. Not having the money necessary to buy the cow, they convince Jack that the beans the baker has found in his father's old hunting jacket are magic, and buy the cow for 5 of them. Jack bids a tearful goodbye to his cow, and the baker orders his wife to return to the village with the cow. He has qualms about being so dishonest, but his wife reasons that the chance to have a child justifies their trickery. Meanwhile, it is revealed that the witch has raised Rapunzel as her own daughter, keeping her locked away from the world in a tall tower in the middle of the woods, accessible only by climbing Rapunzel's long, golden hair. However, a handsome prince spies the beautiful Rapunzel, and resolves to climb the tower himself. In another part of the wood, the baker has tracked down Little Red Riding Hood. Following the witch's advice, he attempts to simply steal the red cape, but her ensuing temper tantrum guilts him into returning it. When Little Red Riding Hood arrives at her grandmother's house, she is swallowed by the wolf. The baker, in pursuit of the cape, slays the wolf, pulling Little Red and her grandmother from the beast's innards. Little Red rewards him with the red cape, reflecting on her new experiences. Meanwhile, Jack's mother angrily tosses the beans aside and sends her son to bed without supper. As Cinderella flees the festival, pursued by another handsome prince and his steward, the wife helps her hide and quizzes Cinderella about the ball. Cinderella explains that it was a nice ball with a very nice prince, but seems fairly ambivalent about the experience. As a giant beanstalk begins to sprout from the ground next to Jack's cottage, the baker's wife spots Cinderella's pure gold slippers. She tries to chase after Cinderella, inadvertently allowing Milky White to run off, leaving the baker's wife without the slippers and the cow. The characters each state morals and credos as the first midnight chimes and they continue their journeys through the woods. The next morning, Jack describes his thrilling adventure after he returns from climbing the beanstalk. He gives the baker 5 gold pieces he stole from the giants to buy back his cow. When the baker hesitates, Jack climbs back up the beanstalk to find more. The mysterious man emerges and taunts the baker, stealing the money. The baker's wife confesses she has lost the cow, and she and the baker split up to look for it. Cinderella's prince and Rapunzel's prince, who are brothers, meet and compare the misery of their newfound and unobtainable loves. The baker's wife, who is eavesdropping, takes note when Rapunzel's prince mentions that he is in love with a girl in a tower with hair as yellow as corn. The baker's wife fools Rapunzel into letting down her hair and pulls out a piece of it. Meanwhile, the mysterious man gives Milky White back to the baker. The baker's wife and Cinderella meet again, and the baker's wife makes a desperate grab for her shoes, almost succeeding before Cinderella flees. The baker and his wife reunite, now with 3 of the 4 items. The baker admits that they've had to work together to fulfill the quest. Jack arrives with a hen that lays golden eggs and attempts to buy Milky White back, but the cow suddenly keels over dead as midnight chimes. Again, the characters exchange morals. The witch discovers that the prince has been visiting Rapunzel and begs Rapunzel to stay with her. When Rapunzel refuses, the witch angrily cuts off Rapunzel's hair and banishes her to a desert. The mysterious man gives the baker the money to buy another cow. Jack encounters Little Red Riding Hood, who is now sporting a wolfskin cape and a knife for protection, and tries to impress her by telling her about the kingdom of the giant. When she refuses to believe him, he is goaded into returning once again to the giant's home to steal a magic harp. Cinderella, returning from the last night of the festival, describes how the prince had spread pitch on the stairs to prevent her from escaping. Caught between wanting to escape and wanting to stay, she eventually resolves to let the prince decide, leaving him one of her slippers as a clue to her identity. The baker's wife frantically tries to convince her to give up her other shoe, offering her the last magic bean in exchange for it. Cinderella throws the bin aside, but trades shoes with the baker's wife and flees. The baker arrives with another cow. They now have all 4 items. The prince's steward grabs the slipper from the baker's wife, and they are fighting over it when a great crash is heard and Jack's mother runs in to report that a giant has fallen from the beanstalk and is dead in her backyard. The prince, more concerned with finding Cinderella, waves her off, and departs with one of the slippers, giving the other to the baker and his wife. Jack, to the relief of his mother, returns with the magic harp. The witch discovers that the new cow is not pure witty it is covered with flour. However, the witch is able to bring Milky White back to life, and instructs the baker and his wife feed the items to her. Jack milks her, but no milk comes. The baker's wife admits that the hair is Rapunzel's, and the witch furiously explains that the magic will not work, because the witch has already touched Rapunzel's hair. The mysterious man tells the baker to feed the hair like corn silk to the cow. Now Milky White gives milk, which is the potion. The witch reveals that the mysterious man is the baker's father. The witch drinks the potion and suddenly the mysterious man falls dead, his reparation complete. The curse is broken and the witch is transformed into a beautiful young woman. Cinderella's prince searches for the girl whose foot fits the slipper. The stepsisters try but can only get it on by cutting off parts of their feet. Cinderella appears, her foot fits the slipper, and she becomes the prince's bride. Rapunzel has born twins in the desert where her prince finds her. The witch attempts to curse the couple, only to find that her powers have been lost. At Cinderella's wedding to the prince, Florinda and Lucinda are blinded by birds as they try to win Cinderella's favor. Everyone but the witch and the stepsisters congratulate themselves on being able to live happily ever after, though they fail to notice another beanstalk growing sky-high in the background. Act 2, the narrator introduces the action again, once upon a time. Later. All the characters seemed happy but are still wishing. The baker and his wife have their precious baby boy, but wish for more room and bicker over the baker's unwillingness to hold his child. Jack and his mother are rich and well-fed, but Jack misses his kingdom in the sky. Cinderella is living with her Prince Charming in the palace, but is getting bored. Suddenly, everyone is knocked over by a loud crash, and enormous footprints have destroyed the witch's garden, sparing only a few beans. The baker and his wife decide that they must tell the royal family, and the baker travels to the palace. His news is ignored by the prince's steward, and also by Jack's mother when he stops at her house to ask Jack's aid. When he returns home, Little Red Riding Hood arrives on her way to Granny's. Her house has been destroyed and her mother is missing. The baker and his wife decide to escort her. Meanwhile, Jack decides that he must slay the giant, and Cinderella learns from her bird friends that her mother's grave was disturbed and decides to investigate, dressed in her old clothes. Once again, everyone heads into the woods, but this time the mood is somber, and the birds have stopped singing, while everyone else is drawn back into the woods. Rapunzel has fled there in a hysterical fit, her treatment at the hands of the witch having driven her into madness. Her prince has followed her, but when he encounters his brother they each confess they have another reason for their presence in the woods. They have grown bored and frustrated with their marriages and now lust after two beautiful women asleep in the woods, Snow White and Sleeping Beauty. The baker, his wife and Little Red Riding Hood get lost in the woods and find Cinderella's family and the steward, who reveal that the castle was set upon by the giant. The witch arrives as well, bringing news that the giant has destroyed the village and the baker's house. Suddenly, thunderous footsteps are heard, and the giant appears. To the shock of all, this giant is a woman, the widow of the giant that Jack killed by chopping down the beanstalk. Her booming voice proclaims that she wants Jack's blood and revenge. To satisfy the giantess, the group realizes they must give her someone, but are unable to decide on whom until they realize that the narrator is still commenting on the actions from the sidelines. Everyone offers her the narrator as a sacrifice, but he convinces them how lost they would be without him. Nevertheless, the witch throws him into the giantess's arms and he is killed upon being dropped. Jack's mother finds the group and aggressively defends her son, angering the giantess, and the steward clubs Jack's mother to quiet her, inadvertently killing her. As the giantess leaves to search for Jack, Rapunzel runs into her path and is trampled, to the horror of the witch and her prince. The royal family continues on their way, fleeing to a hidden kingdom despite the baker's pleas for them to stay and fight the giant. The witch declares she will find Jack and sacrifice him to the giant, and the baker and his wife decide they must find him first and split up to search. The baker's wife meets Cinderella's prince, and he easily seduces the wife. Meanwhile, the baker discovers Cinderella at her mother's destroyed grave and convinces her to join their group for safety. The prince, satisfied, leaves the baker's wife with a few platitudes, and she realizes her error and decides to return to her happy life with the baker and their son. However, she has lost her way, and stumbles into the path of the giant. The baker, Little Red, and Cinderella await the return of the baker's wife when the witch drags in Jack, who she found weeping over the baker's wife's body. The baker, grief-stricken when he learns of his wife's death, angrily agrees to give Jack to the giantess, causing an argument. The characters first blame each other for their predicament, until finally they all decide to blame the witch for growing the beans in the first place. Disgusted, the witch curses them and throws away the rest of her magic beans, reactivating her mother's curse and making her vanish. The grieving baker flees but is visited by his father's spirit, who convinces him to face his responsibilities. The baker returns and helps plan to kill the giantess, using Cinderella's bird friends to peck out the giant's eyes at an area smeared with pitch, where Jack and the baker can finally deliver a fatal blow. Cinderella stays behind to protect the baker's child, and when her prince passes by, he nearly fails to recognize her. She confronts him, having learned of his infidelity from her birds, and he explains his feelings of unfulfillment and his reasons for seducing another woman. She asks him to go, and he sorrowfully leaves. Little Red returns with the news that her grandmother has been killed by the giantess. Meanwhile, the baker tells Jack that his mother is dead. Jack vows to kill the steward in revenge, until the baker convinces him that killing the steward will not benefit anyone. Cinderella comforts Little Red and tries to answer her qualms that killing the giant makes them no better than she is, while the baker explains to Jack his inability to say what is morally correct. The four remaining characters slay the giant, and the deceased characters as well the surviving royal family and the princes return to share one last set of the morals with the audience. The survivors plan to rebuild their lives together, resolving to band together and rebuild. The spirit of the baker's wife appears to comfort her mourning husband, advising her husband to tell their child their story. The baker begins to tell the story, using the same words as the narrator did at the beginning of the play, as the witch appears, with the final moral, "Careful the things you say, children will listen." All join in on a last reprise of the title song, surmising that we all must venture into the woods, but never to forget the past. As the characters conclude the song singing, "Into the woods, and out of the woods and happily ever after," Cinderella closes the show with one last "I wish." Productions. Original Broadway production, Into the Woods premiered at the Old Globe Theatre in San Diego, California, on December 4, 1986 and ran for 50 performances under the direction of James Lapine. Many of the performers from that production appeared in the Broadway cast, but John Cunningham, who played the narrator, Wolf and Stewart, and George Coe, as the mysterious man and Cinderella's father, were replaced by Tom Aldridge, who played the narrator and mysterious man. Kenneth Marshall as Cinderella's prince was replaced by Robert Westenberg. Llewellyn Ponce, who played Little Red Riding Hood, was replaced by Danielle Furland. Ellen Foley, the witch, was replaced by Bernadette Peters. Kay McClelland, who played both Rapunzel and the stepsister Florinda, stayed with the cast but only played Florinda, Rapunzel being played by Pamela Winslow. The musical opened on Broadway at the Martin Beck Theatre on November 5, 1987, and closed on September 3, 1989 after 765 performances. It starred Bernadette Peters, Joanna Gleason, Chip Tsien, Kim Crosby, Ben Wright, Danielle Furland, Chuck Wagner, Mel Louise, Tom Aldridge, and Robert Westenberg. The musical was directed by James Lapine, with musical staging by Lau Lubovitch, settings by Tony Strages, lighting by Richard Nelson, and costumes by Anne Hood Ward. The original production won the 1988 New York Drama Critics Circle Award and the Drama Desk Award for Best Musical, and the original cast recording won a Grammy Award. The show was nominated for 10 Tony Awards, and won 3, Best Score, Best Book and Best Actress in a Musical. Peters left the show after almost 5 months due to a prior commitment to film the movie Slaves of New York. The witch was then played by Betsy Joslin, Phyllis Rashidi, Betsy Joslin, Nancy DeSalt, and Ellen Foley. Other cast replacements included Dick Cavett as the narrator, Edmund Lindeck as the mysterious man, Patricia Ben Peterson as Cinderella, Llewellyn Ponce returning to the role of Little Red Riding Hood, Jeff Blumenkrantz as Jack, Maren Mazzi as Rapunzel, and Kay McClelland, Lauren Mitchell, Cynthia Sykes, and Mary Gordon Murray as the baker's wife. In May 1989, the original cast reunited for one performance, which was filmed and broadcast on U.S. public television on March 20, 1991. This version has since been released on DVD. 10th anniversary benefit performances of this production were held on November 9, 1997 at the Broadway Theatre, with most of original cast. Original cast understudies Chuck Wagner and Jeff Blumenkrantz played Cinderella's Prince Wolf and the Steward in place of Robert Westenberg, and Philip Hoffman and Jonathan Dockishitz played Rapunzel's Prince in place of Mr. Wagner. This concert featured the duet Our Little World, written for the first London production of the show. 1988 U.S. tour. A United States tour began on November 22, 1988 with Cleo Lane playing the Witch, replaced by Betsy Joslin in May 1989. Rex Robbins played the narrator and mysterious man, Charlotte Ray played Jack's mother, and the princes were played by Chuck Wagner and Douglas Sills. The 10-month tour played cities around the country, such as Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. The tour ran at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts from June 1989 to July 16, 1989, with a reviewer for the Washington Post writing, "His lovely score, poised between melody and dissonance, is the perfect measure of our tenuous condition." The songs invariably follow the characters' thinking patterns, as they weigh their options and digest their experience. Needless to say, that doesn't make for traditional showstoppers. But it does make for vivacity of another kind. And Sondheim's lyrics are brilliant. I think you'll find these cast members alert and engaging. Original London production. The original West End production opened on September 25, 1990 at the Phoenix Theatre and closed on February 23, 1991 after 197 performances. It was directed by Richard Jones, and produced by David Mirvish, with choreography by Anthony Van Last, costumes by Sue Blaine and orchestrations by Jonathan Tunick. The cast featured Julia Mackenzie as the witch, Ian Bartholomew as the baker, Imelda Staunton as the baker's wife and Clive Carter as the wolf Cinderella's prince. The show received 7 Olivier Award nominations in 1991, winning for Best Actress in a Musical and Best Director of a Musical. Some story aspects and one song that were cut from the original production were added to the London production. The song Our Little World was added. This song was a duet sung between the witch and Rapunzel, giving further insight into the care the witch has for her self-proclaimed daughter and a desire Rapunzel has to see the world outside of her tower. The overall feel of the show was a lot darker than that of the original Broadway production. Critic Michael Billington wrote, "But the evening's triumph belongs also to director Richard Jones, set designer Richard Hudson and costume designer Sue Blaine, who evoke exactly the right mood of haunted theatricality. Old-fashioned footlights give the faces a sinister glow. The woods themselves are a semicircular, black and silver screen punctuated with 9 doors and a crazy clock. They achieve exactly the agreeable terror of Gustave Dor's children's illustrations. And the effects are terrific, doors opening to reveal the rotating magnified eyeball or the admonitory finger of the predatory giant." 1998 London Revival. A new intimate production of the show opened at the Donmar Warehouse on November 16, 1998, closing on February 13, 1999. This revival was directed by John Crowley and designed by his brother, Bob Crowley. The cast included Claire Burt as the witch, Nick Holder as the baker, Sophie Thompson as the baker's wife, Jenna Russell as Cinderella, Sheridan Smith as Little Red Riding Hood and Frank Middlemass as the narrator Mysterious Man. Russell later appeared as the baker's wife in the 2010 Regent's Park production. Thompson won the 1999 Olivier Award for Best Actress in a Musical for her performance, while the production itself was nominated for Outstanding Musical Production. 2002 Broadway Revival. A revival opened at the Armanson Theatre in Los Angeles, running from February 1, 2002 to March 24, 2002. This production was directed and choreographed, with the same principal cast, which later ran on Broadway. The 2002 Broadway Revival, directed by James Lapine and choreographed by John Carrifer, began previews on April 13, 2002 and opened April 30, 2002 at the Broadhurst Theatre, closing on December 29 after a run of 18 previews and 279 regular performances. It starred Vanessa L. Williams as the witch, John McMartin as the narrator, Stephen DeRosa as the baker, Kerry O'Malley as the baker's wife, Greg Adelman as Cinderella's Prince Wolf, Christopher Sieber as Rapunzel's Prince Wolf, Molly Ephraim as Little Red Riding Hood, Adam Wiley as Jack and Laura Benanti as Cinderella. Judi Dench provided the pre-recorded voice of the giant. Lapine revised the script slightly for this production, with a cameo appearance of the Three Little Pigs restored from the earlier San Diego production. Other changes, apart from numerous small dialogue changes, included the addition of the song Our Little World, a duet for the Witch and Rapunzel written for the first London production, The addition of a second wolf in the song Hello Little Girl, who competes for Little Red's attention with the first wolf, the portrayal of Jack's cow by a live performer in an intricate costume, and new lyrics were written for The Last Midnight, now sung by the witch as a menacing lullaby to the baker's baby. The revival won the Tony Awards for the Best Revival of a Musical and Best Lighting Design. This Broadway revival wardrobe is on display at the Costume World Broadway Collection in South Florida. London Royal Opera House, 2007, a revival at the Royal Opera House's Linbury studio in Covent Garden had a limited run from June 14 through June 30, 2007, followed by a short stint at the Lowry Theatre, Salford Quays, Manchester between July 7. The production mixed opera singers, musical theatre actors as well as film and television actors, including Anne Reid as Jack's mother and Gary Waldhorn as the narrator. The production itself, directed by Will Tuckett, was met with mixed reviews. Although there were clear standout performances, the production completely sold out 3 weeks before opening. As this was an opera production, the show and its performers were overlooked for the musical nominations in the 2008 Olivier Awards. This production featured Susie Toes, Peter Caulfield, Beverly Cline, Anna Francolini, Clive Rowe, Nicholas Garrett and Lara Pulver. This was the second Sondheim musical to be staged by the Opera House, following 2003's Sweeney Todd. Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, 2010, the Olivier Award-winning Regent a Euro unregistered trademark South Park Open Air Theatre production, directed by Timothy Shedder and choreographed by Liam Steele, ran for a 6-week limited season from August 6 to September 11, 2010. The cast included Hannah Waddingham as the witch, Mark Hatfield as the baker, Jenna Russell as the baker a Euro unregistered trademark S-wife, Helen Dallimore as Cinderella, and Judi Dench as the recorded voice of the giant. Gareth Valentine was the musical director. The musical was performed outdoors in a wooded area. Whilst the book remained mostly unchanged, the subtext of the plot was dramatically altered by casting the role of the narrator as a young schoolboy lost in the woods following a family argument, a device used to further illustrate the musical a unregistered trademark S themes of parenting and adolescence. The production opened to wide critical acclaim, much of the press commenting on the effectiveness of the open-air setting. The Telegraph reviewer, for example, wrote, "It is an inspired idea to stage this show in the magical, sylvan surroundings of Regent a Euro unregistered trademark South Park, and designer Soutra Gilmore has come up with a marvelously rickety, adventure playground of a set, all ladders, stairs and elevated walkways, with Rapunzel discovered high up in a tree." The New York Times reviewer commented, "The natural environment makes for something genuinely haunting and mysterious as night falls on the audience." Stephen Sondheim attended twice, reportedly extremely pleased with the production. The production also won the Laurence Olivier Award for Best Musical Revival, and Michael Xavier, who played Cinderella's Prince and the Wolf, was nominated for the Laurence Olivier Award for Best Performance in a Supporting Role in a Musical. The production was recorded in its entirety and released for public download through Digital Theatre, an online video production company. Public Theatre, New York, 2012. The Regent's Park Open Air Theatre production transferred to the Public Theatre's 2012 summer series of free performances Shakespeare in the Park at the Delacorte Theatre in Central Park, New York, with an American cast as well as new designers. Shedder again was the director and Steele served as co-director and choreographer. Performances were originally to run from July 24 to August 25, 2012, but the show was extended till September 1, 2012. The cast included Amy Adams as the baker's wife, Donna Murphy as the witch, Dennis O'Hare as the baker, Chip Zien as the mysterious man Cinderella's father, Jack Broderick as the young narrator, Gideon Glick as Jack, Cooper Grodin as Rapunzel Euro unregistered trademark S Prince, Ivan Hernandez as Cinderella Euro unregistered trademark S Prince Wolf, Tina Johnson as Granny, Josh Lamon as the steward, Jesse Mueller as Cinderella, Laura Shoup as Cinderella Euro unregistered trademark S Mother, Tess Soltaire as Rapunzel and Glenn Close as the voice of the giant. The set was a collaboration between original open-air theatre designer Soutra Gilmore and John Lee Beatty, and rises over 50 feet in the air, with a series of tree-covered catwalks and pathways. The production was dedicated to Nora Ephron, who died earlier in 2012. In February 2012 and in May 2012, reports of a possible Broadway transfer surfaced, with the production's principal actors in negotiations to reprise their roles. In January 2013, it was announced that the production will not transfer to Broadway due to scheduling conflicts. Other productions: 1993 Sydney Theatre Company production. This production played from March 19, 1993 to June 5, 1993 at the Drama Theatre, Sydney Opera House. It starred Judy Connolly, Geraldine Turner, Tony Sheldon, Philip Quast, Sharon Miller-Chipp, Pippa Grandison, Simon Chilvers and D.J. Foster. 1994 Watershed Theatre production. This production played from November 18, 1993 to December 23, 1993 at the Watershed Theatre, Auckland. It starred Suzanne Lee, Kevin Smith, Miranda Harcourt, and Sophia Hawthorne. 1998 Melbourne Theatre Company production. This production played from January 17, 1998 to February 21, 1998 at the Playhouse, Victorian Arts Centre. It starred Rhonda Birchmore, John McTiernan, Gina Riley, Lisa McCune, Peter Carroll, Anthony Way, Tamsin Carroll and Robert Grubb. 2007 Barcelona production. Bosco's Indens was the Catalan adaptation by Joan Vives with the collaboration of Joan Liwa Esposo. It was first presented by the theatre company Dargo Dagam in Girona at the Festival Temporada Alta on November 22, 2007, and in January it was held at Tita Victor Squadria, in Avenida del Paralelel, Barcelona, Spain. 2009/10 London production. In December 2009 the show was presented at the Bloomsbury Theatre London by the UCLU Musical Theatre Society in a brand new production. Produced by Alicia Bennett and directed by Dom O'Hanlon, the show was personally supported by Stephen Sondheim and praised for its new interpretation. The production was selected to be performed as part of the Sunday Times National Student Drama Festival 2010 in Scarborough, featuring the original cast and orchestra at the Spa Theatre, Scarborough in April 2010. 2011 Singapore production. The 2011 Singapore production presented by Dream Academy ran from July 29 to August 7, 2011. Directed by Glenn Goei, it featured Rhea Jones, Adrian Pang, Selena Tan, Sebastian Tan, Emma Yong, Denise Tan and Lim Kay-Siu. 2011 Santa Ana production. The Mysterium Theatre presented the production directed by Marla Ladd ran from August 18 to September 24, 2012 Baltimore and Connecticut production, directed by Mark Lamos, Center Stage in Baltimore, Maryland presented Into the Woods, running from March 7 to April 15, 2012. The cast included Danielle Furland as the baker's wife, Jeffrey Denman as the narrator, Jenny Latimer as Cinderella, Justin Scott Brown as Jack, Eric Lieberman as the baker, Dana Steingold as Little Red Riding Hood, Nick Walker as Wolf Cinderella's prince, and Lauren Kennedy as the witch. The production transferred to Westport Country Playhouse for a run lasting from May 1 to May 25, 2012. 2013 Puerto Rican production. The first professional Spanish-language production, Dentro del Bosque, was produced by the University of Puerto Rico Repertory Theatre and premiered in San Juan at Teatro de la Universidad on March 14. Directed by Edgar Garca Rivera, it starred Bacta Santiago, Ana Isabel, Lourdes Robles, Julio Enrique Court, Xavier Rivera, Alzas Santiago Diagua Plus or Minusa, Angeles Nives, Daisy Maeso, Armando Vejurano, Sarah Garcia, Kedward Avila. Copyright S. 2014 Paris production, directed by Libla Kelly. Musical direction by David Charles Abel. April 1 to Euro 12, 2014 at the Centre du Car Saint-Helot, Paris. It featured Kaimi McLaren, Leslie Clack, Nicholas Garrett, Beverly Klein, Pascal Charbonneau, Damien Thantray, David Curry, Francesca Jackson, Rebecca DuPont Davis, Louise Adler. 2014 Interlochen Arts Academy production. In May 2014, the show was performed by students at the prestigious Interlochen Arts Academy. The production was acclaimed for its costume and makeup design, and its rotating set. 2014 Oregon Shakespeare Festival production, directed by Amanda Deinert, costume design by Linda Rothk, and scenic design by Rachel Hawke. The show ran from June 4, 2014 to October 11, 2014 with Miriam A. Laub as the witch, Anthony Heald as the narrator and mysterious stranger, Harvey Amuaz as the baker, Rachel Warren as the baker a unregistered trademark S-wife, Jenny Granbury as Cinderella, Justine Rose Anderson as Little Red Riding Hood, Miles Fletcher as Jack, Catherine E. Curzon as Milky White, Little Red Riding Hood a unregistered trademark S Granny, Giantess, and Cinderella. Unregistered trademark S Stepmother, Jeremy Peter Johnson as Cinderella unregistered trademark S Prince and the Wolf, Howie Seago as the Wolf, John Tufts as Rapunzel unregistered trademark S Prince, Roy Bacchus as Rapunzel, Robin Gudrun Nordley as Jack unregistered trademark S Mother, Robert Vincent Frank as Cinderella unregistered trademark S Father, Katie Bradley as Florinda and Sleeping Beauty, Christiana Clark as Lucinda and Snow White, and David Kelly as the Steward. 2014 Victorian opera with Orchestra Victoria, directed by Stuart Maunder. Musical director Benjamin Northey July 19 to 26, 2014, 2014 Off-Broadway production, an off-Broadway production, directed by Noah Brody and Ben Steinfeld, will begin performances December 19, 2014 prior to an official opening January 15, 2015, at the Lara Pels Theatre. Like the original Broadway production 28 years prior, this production did a tryout run at the Old Globe Theatre in San Diego, California from July 12, 2014 to August 17, 2014 with the opening night taking place on July 17, 2014 San Francisco production, San Francisco Playhouse puts up Into the Woods in June 2014. The musical is directed by Susie Damilano and opens June 28. Adaptations. Junior version, the musical has been adapted into a child-friendly version for use by schools, with the second act completely removed, as well as certain elements from the first. The show is shortened from the original 3+ hours to fit in a 60 to 80-minute range, and the music transposed into keys that more easily fit young voices. Film. Walt Disney Pictures is producing a film adaptation of Into the Woods, directed by Rob Marshall and starring Meryl Streep, Emily Blunt, James Corden, Anna Kendrick, Chris Pine, Johnny Depp, Lilla Crawford, Daniel Huddlestone, Christine Baranski, and Tracy Ullman. A film will be released on December 25, 2014. Casting history, The Principal, original, casts of notable productions of Into the Woods, musical numbers, analysis of book and music. In most productions of Into the Woods, including the original Broadway production, several parts are doubled. Cinderella's Prince and the Wolf, who share the characteristic of being unable to control their appetites, are played by the same actor. Similarly, the narrator and the mysterious man, who share the characteristic of commenting on the story while avoiding any personal involvement or responsibility. Granny and Cinderella's mother, who are both matriarchal characters in the story, are also typically played by the same person, who also gives voice to the nurturing but later murderous giant's wife. The show covers multiple themes: growing up, parents and children, accepting responsibility, morality, and finally, wish fulfillment and its consequences. The Time magazine reviewers wrote that the play's basic Einschüchter is at heart. Most fairy tales are about the loving yet embattled relationship between parents and children. Almost everything that goes wrong which is to say, almost everything that can arises from a failure of parental or filial duty, despite the best intentions. Stephen Holden wrote that the themes of the show include parent-child relationships and the individual's responsibility to the community. The witch isn't just a scowling old hag, but a key symbol of moral ambivalence. James Lapine said that the most unpleasant person would have the truest things to say and the nicer people would be less honest. In the witch's words, "I'm not good. I'm not nice. I'm just right." The score is also notable in Sondheim's output, because of its intricate reworking and development of small musical motifs. In particular, The opening words, "I wish," are set to the interval of a rising major second, and this small unit is both repeated and developed throughout the show, just as Lapine's book explores the consequences of self-interest and wishing. The dialogue in the show is characterized by the heavy use of syncopated speech. In many instances, the characters' lines are delivered with a fixed beat that follows natural speech rhythms, but is also purposely composed in eighth, 16th, and quarter note rhythms as part of the spoken song. Like many Sondheim Lapine productions, the songs contain thought-process narrative, where characters converse or think aloud. Sondheim drew on parts of his troubled childhood when writing the show. In 1987, he told Time magazine that the father uncomfortable with babies was his father, and the mother who regrets having had children was his mother. Awards and nominations: Original Broadway production, Original London production, 1999 London Revival, 2002 Broadway Revival, 2010 London Revival, 2012 New York Revival. References. External links: Into the Woods at the Internet Broadway Database, libretto for Into the Woods on the Stephen Sondheim Reference Guide, illustrated book of Into the Woods article, Sondheim.com, Into the Woods at the Music Theatre International website, Into the Woods JR at the Music Theatre International website, profile, Into the Woods, OVRTUR, International Database of Musicals.